Philip's phone vibrated. At first, he ignored it. These days, his phone only brought bad news. Another reminder from the hospital or another message from the loan apps he had borrowed from. He was tired. Tired of problems, tired of life. But he decided to check, just to see which new problem was waiting for him. With a sad face, he reached for the phone, already expecting the worst. But as he stared at the screen, he was surprised. His tired eyes widened. It was a credit alert of 10 million. Philip is a 23-year-old man who was born into a poor but hardworking family in the village of Otu. His father, Ifeanyi, was a struggling carpenter, and his mother sold vegetables in the market. They barely made enough to survive, but they raised Philip as the only child with love and discipline. When he was younger, he had always wanted to continue his education, but poverty had other plans, so he had to learn shoemaking. Things were a little bit okay for him and his family until tragedy struck when his father died in an accident at a construction site. With no savings and no support, Philip had to go to the city, working day and night to provide for his mother and also support himself. But things were too hard. His mother was still in pain. She couldn't get over her husband's death, which made her cry every day, refusing to eat, and she eventually fell sick. Philip received a call from one of his mother's friends about his mother's health, and he rushed to the village. Since the village hospital couldn't provide proper treatment, he had to take her to the city for better care. But the hospital bills quickly became more than he could afford. Each day started just like every other day in Philip's life. Slow, tiring, and full of money worries. He opened his eyes to the bright light coming from the small window of his one-room apartment in the city of Afam. Afam heat was very strong, making sweat cover his body, and the small old mattress under him felt wet and uncomfortable. The room was scattered, just like his thoughts. Clothes were on the floor, some clean, some dirty, all mixed. The small wooden table in the corner was full of leather pieces, brushes and polish, all showing the work that never seemed to bring enough money. His shoe machine, the only thing he could call his own, just sat there. Before, it had given him hope. Now, it was surrounded by half-finished shoes, all belonging to customers who had refused to pay or kept giving excuses. Some said they would come back next week, while some had disappeared completely. Philip was tired of begging for his money, only to hear the same stories every time. His stomach made a loud noise, reminding him that he had not eaten. He slept hungry last night, just like many other nights. He thought about stepping outside, facing another day in the rough streets of Afam, but the thought alone made him weak. Still, he had no choice. For 3 days, there had been no light. The fan in the corner of the room sat useless, covered in dust, and the small rechargeable lamp on the table had died 2 nights ago. It filled the room like a prison. But that was the least of Philip's problems. That morning, the landlord had come again, knocking hard on his door. The man didn't even waste time shouting. He just reminded Philip that his rent was due and he left. Philip didn't bother to respond. What was there to say? He had no money. His mother's condition was getting worse too. The last time he visited the hospital, the nurses had looked at him with pity. The bill was unpaid, and the doctors had stopped her treatment. He had begged them to give him time, but even he knew he was running out of options. Philip had long accepted that life was one long struggle, a fight that never ended. Some people were born lucky, others, like him, just had to survive. Then his phone vibrated. At first, he ignored it. These days, his phone only brought bad news. Another reminder from the hospital or another message from the loan apps he had borrowed from. He was tired of problems, tired of life. But he decided to check, just to see which new problem was waiting for him. With a sad face, he reached for the phone, already expecting the worst. But as he stared at the screen, he was surprised. His tired eyes widened at the sight of a credit alert of 10 million. For a few seconds, he didn't move. The number stayed there, clear and real. His mind refused to understand. 10 million naira? In his account? How? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mind went blank, and all he could see were the numbers on his phone screen. He was sweating as he refreshed the app again and again, but the numbers didn't change. The 10 million naira was still there. This had to be a mistake. Or maybe he was dreaming. Yes, that had to be it. He had slept hungry too many nights. Maybe his brain was playing tricks on him. Desperate to wake up, he slapped himself several times. He was in pain, but nothing changed. The money was still there. Doubt crept into his thoughts. This had to be a scam. It was the only thing that made sense. He had heard stories, fraudsters sending fake alerts, tricking people into clicking links, stealing their details. So he quickly checked the sender's details, expecting to see something strange. But there was nothing suspicious. No message asking him to click a link. No unknown sender. Just a clean, official deposit. His heart was pounding. He did the only thing that made sense. He called the bank's customer service. The line rang for what felt like forever before someone picked up. Philip barely let them finish their greeting before he asked, "Please, I just got a credit alert. 10 million naira. Is it real?" There was a brief silence. Then the response came, calm and professional. "Sir, your balance is correct." Philip was in shock and immediately cut the call. The money was real. Philip sat still, looking at his phone screen. 10 million naira was in his account, and one big question filled his mind. What should he do? He was happy and also scared. He could not stay in one place. He got up and started walking around the small room, thinking of what to do. Many thoughts ran through his head. If he returned the money, nothing would change. He would still be the same struggling shoemaker. His landlord would still disturb him for rent. Customers would still owe him money. His mother would still be in the hospital, getting worse every day. But if he kept the money, his life could change forever. He could pay his rent or move to a better place. He could clear all his debts. He could give his mother the best treatment. He could start a better business and stop suffering. He was so confused. But what if the owner came looking for the money? What if it was a trap? What if keeping it brought bigger problems? The decision was eating him up inside. He could not think straight. He needed advice. And there was only one person he trusted, Kunle. Kunle was a sharp guy, a real street hustler who knew how to survive in the city of Afan. He lived just 2 blocks away, always full of ideas and ready with a plan. If anyone could tell him what to do, it was Kunle. Philip wasted no time. He left his small room and went straight to Kunle's place. When he got there, he told him everything. The alert, the confusion, the fear. Kunle listened with his eyes shining with excitement. When Philip showed him the bank alert, Kunle's mouth fell open. Then, slowly, a big smile spread across his face. Kunle didn't even need time to think. His mind was already made up. "This is your destiny helper at work," he said with confidence. "This money is yours. Enjoy your life." But Philip's heart was still not settled. He was still doubtful. What if someone comes looking for it? He asked in a low voice. Kunle laughed and shook his head. Who sent 10 million by mistake? And if they do, why haven't they called you? Bro, this money is clean. If you don't take it, I will. He laughed as he spoke as if the whole thing was a joke. But Philip decided to consider what he said. This money could change everything. It could save his mother's life, wipe away his struggles, and he would no longer be just a poor shoemaker. He could be somebody, a man people respected. Kunle patted his shoulder and smiled. Just don't forget me, oh. Give me small money when you finally decide to spend it. Philip nodded. No problem. That night, after thinking and thinking, he finally made a decision. His heart was pounding as he opened his banking app. Slowly, he typed in the hospital's account details and sent 200,000. Then he waited, expecting the bank to block his account or for someone to call in. But nothing happened. The money left his account just like that. No warning, no problem. Feeling grateful, he also sent 50,000 to Kunle as promised. The next day, without wasting time, Philip went to see his mother in the hospital and he paid off all her hospital bills in full. The surgery was held on that day. It went well, and she was finally out of danger. She questioned him on how he got the money, but he just lied to her that it was from selling one of his best shoes, which she believed, because her son doesn't have any other means of making money. Philip brought some foodstuff and clothes and handed her some money before she returned to the village. For the first time in a long time, Philip felt like his life was about to change. Days turned into weeks. Still, no one called. No one came knocking. At first, Philip was scared, always expecting a problem to come. But as time went on and nothing happened, his fear started to fade. Confidence replaced his doubt. The money was his now. With boldness, he took the first big step of his life. He moved out of his small, stuffy room in Afam and rented a better apartment. No more heat, no more struggling with rent. For the first time, he lived in comfort. Then, he focused on his business. He bought better machines and materials, rented a proper workshop, and expanded his shoemaking business. But he didn't stop there. He started his shoe brand. He designed and made quality shoes, putting his name on them, which made people start noticing his work. He stopped wearing cheap, faded clothes and started dressing in fine outfits. He bought himself a car, and the shoemaker who once struggled to buy food now ate in the best restaurants. He no longer begged customers for payments. Now, people came looking for his shoes. As his business grew, bigger shoe brands noticed him. Some invested in his work, and others partnered with him. His name started spreading. Philip, the poor shoemaker, was now a rising businessman. But through it all, he never forgot the most important thing: his mother. He made sure she had the best care. Her health improved and she smiled again. Seeing her happy made him happy too. Life had finally changed for Philip. The days of suffering were over, or so he thought. So one day, Kunle invited him to a big club so they could party. When he got there, the place was filled with rich people enjoying themselves. Then a young lady noticed him amongst the crowd. Her name was Amara, and she was one of the most popular girls in Afam. She had always been out of reach. Beautiful, elegant, and the kind of woman who only entertained rich men. Back when Philip was just a struggling shoemaker, she wouldn't even look at him twice. She was known in Afam for her high-class taste. She only dated men who drove flashy cars, wore expensive watches, and spent money like water. To someone like Philip, she was like a dream he could never touch. but fate had other plans. Kule had invited him again to a rooftop party in the city, saying it was time to start moving with the big boys. Philip had dressed his best that night: designer shoes, gold wristwatch, expensive perfume. He was looking good, and when he stepped into the party, heads turned. At that same party, he saw Amara. She was laughing with a group of men, her wine glass in one hand, her long dress hugging her curves. She looked like something out of a movie. He admired her from a distance, thinking she would never notice him. But then, their eyes met and she smiled at him. It started with small talk, then a dance, then a private conversation by the balcony. Amara liked money, and Philip looked like he had plenty of it. That was all that mattered. From that night, everything changed. Now, she laughed at his jokes. She held his arm at parties, introduced him to her friends, and called him baby in that sweet voice that made his heart race. She looked at him like he was the only man in the world, and Philip believed every word she said. He drank and partied in his new life, enjoying every bit of it. The days of suffering were far behind him. Money was no longer a problem, so he spent it without thinking. He moved with the confidence of a man who had escaped the chains of poverty. He had everything he ever wanted. But then, the shadow of doubt returned. It started with a phone call. A deep, calm, and chilling voice whispered, "Return the money." Philip froze. His heart pounded in his chest, and he couldn't breathe. He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at the screen. The number was hidden. Before he could react, the call ended. At first, he tried to convince himself it was a prank. Maybe Kunle was playing games. Maybe someone was jealous of his success. But then, the calls kept coming. At random times, day and night, the same deep voice would whisper the same three words: "Return the money." One evening, as Philip sat outside his shop, thinking and enjoying the cool breeze, an old man approached him. His garment was plain, not the rich flowing type worn by wealthy men, but something about him felt different. Philip frowned as the man stopped in front of him. He didn't recognize him. Then, in a calm but firm voice, the old man spoke. "That money is not yours," he said, "and they are coming." Philip's stomach twisted. His mouth went dry. The cold breeze suddenly felt hotter. His heart pounded in his chest. The old man wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. Return it before it's too late. He quickly looked around to see if anyone else had heard the man. But the street was normal. But he was scared. He felt exposed. Like everyone was watching him, like the whole world was after him. He turned back to the old man, but he was gone. Vanished, just like that. Philip wondered with fear. Who was that man? How did he know? And what did he mean by "they are coming"? He was confused. A few weeks later, Philip started noticing a black SUV everywhere he went. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. But then it kept appearing outside his shop, near his apartment, even when he was out with Amara. No matter where he went, the SUV was always there, parked at a distance, watching. He tried to ignore it. He told himself he was overthinking, that it was just a random car. But deep down, fear was growing inside him. Then one night, he decided to test them. He took a taxi instead of his usual car. As they drove through the busy streets of the city, he told the driver to take unexpected turns, enter narrow streets, and switch routes. He watched closely in the side mirror. The SUV still followed him. This wasn't his anxiety. When he finally reached the street, he quickly paid the driver and jumped out of the taxi. Without wasting time, he ran straight into his apartment, locking the door behind him. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. After a few minutes, he slowly walked to his window and peeked outside. The SUV was gone, and he was relieved. Maybe he was just overthinking things, he said to himself. To be sure, he decided to step outside and check properly. The moment he stepped out, 4 men grabbed him. Before he could scream or fight back, they shoved him into a waiting van and drove off. They took him to a mansion in an abandoned area. The house was massive, the kind only the richest people in the city could afford. The gates were tall and heavily guarded. The floors are clean and well polished with expensive paintings hung on the wall. The air smelled of expensive cigarettes and power. Philip's leg felt weak as they dragged him inside and he begged for mercy. He was taken to a grand office that belonged to the owner of the house. The cover was removed from his face, and sitting behind a massive wooden desk was a man Philip had only seen on the news, Chief Odenigbo, a politician and businessman. A man known for his ruthlessness. His name carries weight in Afam. People feared him, and his enemies disappeared without a trace. Chief Odenigbo didn't look up immediately. He was sipping from a glass of whiskey, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. When he finally raised his head, his gaze was cold, piercing through Philip like a knife. Then he smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "You took my money," he said, his voice calm but filled with something deadly. "And you didn't even think to return it." Philip begged for his life and began to apologize to Chief Odenigbo. The chief laughed and told Philip that he wasn't going to beat around the bush. "You have 3 choices here." Philip's throat went dry. His hands were shaking. He wanted to speak, to explain, but his mouth refused to open. Odenigbo looked at Philip and said, "1," he said, raising a finger. "You pay me back the money right now." Philip felt his heart drop. Right now? It was impossible. The money was gone. He had spent it on his business, his mother's treatment, and his new life. 2, Odenigbo continued, "You work for me to repay the debt." Philip was more than scared to work for him. He already knew that anything involving this man would not be legal. Then, Odenigbo's smile faded. 3, he said, "You disappear permanently, and no one will find you." The room felt silent. Philip's whole body went weak. The meaning was clear. If he didn't choose wisely, he wouldn't leave that mansion alive. Philip was scared. He didn't have up to 10 million to pay back. That option was out. And working for a man like Chief Odenigbo, that felt like selling his soul. Still, he had to ask. His voice came out shaking. "Work for you, how?" Odenigbo's smile deepened, his fingers still tapping on the desk. "Let's just say I need someone who can move money, without questions." Philip didn't like the sound of that. He understood immediately. Money laundering, illegal transactions, dirty deals. Philip begged for mercy, saying he wasn't into things like that. The chief got angry and told his boys to beat Philip, and after some time, the chief told them to stop. He asked Philip to choose again, and with no way out, Philip agreed. "Now you're talking," the chief said. For weeks, he lived a dangerous life. Day by day, he was moving large sums, making quiet transactions and earning the chief's confidence. He thought everything was going well until one evening, just as he was about to enter his house. A man in his 40s stopped him and said he was from the police. Fear gripped Philip. Had he been caught? He tried to act normal, but the officer already knew everything. His secret dealings with Odenigbo and the illegal transactions. Philip was terrified and started begging. But the officer made him an offer. If he confessed and helped them, they would protect him. Philip saw this as his only chance to escape Odenigbo, so he agreed. He told the police everything and was asked to keep working for Odenigbo while secretly giving them information. If he helped them catch Odenigbo, he would finally be free. Philip lived a double life. By day, he worked for Odenigbo, while by night, he fed every detail to the police officer. The policeman's name is Mr. Wale. He had spent years building his case against Odenigbo, but he needed someone on the inside. Someone like Philip. With each transaction, Philip sent copies of account numbers, signed documents, and recorded conversations to Mr. Wale's team. Hidden cameras in the meeting rooms, tapped phone calls, secret recordings. Slowly, piece by piece, they built a solid case. One night, after months of gathering evidence, the time had come. The authorities were ready. Odenigbo would finally fall. Mr. Wale went to collect the last evidence needed to finally arrest Chief Odenigbo. But something went wrong. As Philip handed over the final documents as the secret meeting spot, a car's headlights flashed through the darkness. Odenigbo's men. They had found out. Philip heard a gunshot, but before he could react, the bullet hit someone and screams filled the air. Then, Philip looked around to see Mr. Wale was hit. Without thinking too much, Philip panicked and ran. The streets of the city were dark. Philip's legs moved on their own, jumping over gutters and pushing through crowds. But no matter how fast he ran, he knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. In the crowd, someone grabbed him. It was one of Mr. Wale's team members. Philip struggled to run away, but other police came to grab him and his wrists were cuffed. Mr. Wale had suspected something like this was going to happen, so he had his team members scattered around. Philip was surrounded by the cold walls of the interrogation room. The air was heavy with scents of sweat and regrets. A police officer sat across from him. The man stared at Philip, watching him like a man who already knew all the answers. Then, finally, he spoke. Was the money worth it? Philip said nothing, because deep inside, he already knew the answer. No matter what he said, nothing could save him. Odenigbo was arrested days later. The evidence Mr. Wale had gathered was too strong. Even with his power, even with his money, he couldn't escape the law this time. But Mr. Wale didn't survive, unfortunately. Philip was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his involvement in money laundering. Even though he helped expose Odenigbo, the law didn't let him walk free. His greed had cost him everything: his business, his freedom, and the new life he had built. Later on, Kunle heard what happened to Philip, as it was the talk of the town. He told Philip's mother, and she was so sad to hear this happen to her child. Philip was so ashamed of himself and didn't think he could face his mother. As he sat in his prison cell, he thought about the past. The money that had seemed like a blessing had been a curse all along. It had given him comfort, but it had also dragged him into a world he didn't belong to. He had made choices that led him here, and now he had to face the consequences. He had learned his lesson, but it had come at a great price. The next time he saw 10 million in his account, he would do the right thing. But now it was too late.